can we go back a bit to bullying and maybe talk at length at what you know about Private Danny Chen's case and Private Harold Liu's case, and maybe address the culture of hazing and bullying? For example, is ALC, do they have any programs with the youth right now that address that?
Yeah, we do. So there's kind of two, but we'll focus on one. The criminal justice reform program actually also works on education bullying issues because it relates to the school to prison pipeline and the policy of zero tolerance in schools that funnels more and more minority youth out of our school systems into our juvenile and prison systems, or just into not having high school diplomas. I'm really glad that Zara brought up the hate incidences at school. We've, the past couple of years, most of the hate incidents we've worked on in school relate to South Asian, Muslim, Arab youth being picked on by other youth, and those youth feeling helpless, feeling like the school doesn't care and feels like that's okay, you know. What if you guys are terrorists? Let's go ahead and let those kids do what they want to you. We can just ignore it when you get really mad and you bring it back to school to beat up the people who have been bullying you and taunting you. Then we're going to expel you and call the police on you. And we've actually seen that pattern throughout the Bay Area, most recently at Berkeley High School, where a very similar case happened. And in those incidences, we will go into the school and we will pull kind of out of the micro world of looking at the offender and the victim, and we'll say, no, it's actually the school's fault. And we'll come in and we'll say it's absolutely the school's fault that this happened, and there's all these things they need to do to prevent this from happening in the future, and they need to get rid of those expulsion suspensions and work at this in a different manner. So we've taken that approach, and it's been a really interesting approach because the schools are usually very taken back because they're so focused on pushing this kid out of the school into the juvenile system and getting rid of this kid and this problem that they are pretty shocked when we point the finger back at them.
No other thoughts?
I think that the thing that comes to mind for me, and this is related to what I forgot earlier, is taking the lawyer hat off for a second and putting on the community advocate hat. I want us to be proud of who we are. I want us to be proud to be Japanese American or Korean or Muslim or whatever, however you identify. And I think one of the really frightening things that we're seeing in terms of the impact of this, particularly in the Muslim and South Asian communities, people hiding their identities, right? Like kids don't want to be called Muhammad at school, right? Like they're changing their name to Mo. And if their name is Jihad, like they're just not going to school, right? And so it's problematic, and is a consequence that I think that we don't talk about enough, is that as someone who is, I can never forget if I can never remember if it counts as first or second generation, but I was born and raised in the United States, right? Like we took vacations across country. We didn't go anywhere. We went to Canada if we went anywhere foreign. And I was always taught that that you're being a Muslim, that you're being someone of Pakistani descent is what makes America beautiful. And we're not, I think that's another consequence of this, is that are Asian American kids afraid of their Asian American identity, right? Do they not want to eat ethnic food because they don't want to be made fun of at school? And these are the small ways that these things manifest in our lives, particularly for young people.
And yeah, I think like San Francisco in many ways is the leading edge of a bigger experiment. And the ideas that we've talked about of diversity being a good thing, it still holds, but it's not an easy thing, right? And the nature of San Francisco requires to try and deal with the friction that comes with diversity. I think what the Vincent Chin case did is it sort of exposed, in some ways, the benefits of uniting. But we also have to recognize that there are also costs to creating something that's homogenous. Right? And I think that the project that we have now as a people, and I think in particular in San Francisco, is how do we reconcile, at the one hand, celebrating, being proud of our unique identities, but then also at the same time figuring out how to shape something that is united around ideals, around beliefs, around core values and ethics, right? And one thing that we do at CA is we try and sponsor a whole variety of projects that share those values, and work to support formerly incarcerated members of our community. Taking the lead when Prop 8, which is now, and I think at least in the Bay Area, it's become a little bit easier to talk about, but even going back 5-6 years ago, so much misunderstanding, so much bigotry towards our LGBT brothers and sisters, and I think that all of us have to figure out ways to lean into that, right, and to not see it as a trade-off. And so that when we fight for people who maybe we don't readily identify with, in fact, what we are doing is creating a situation that makes it easier and better for the folks that we do identify with. And there's a little bit of contradiction in that, but I do think that, that San Francisco and the bullying and the hate, like all those things ultimately are part of a similar picture. And I think here in the Bay Area, there is a very unique opportunity and responsibility that, to be quite honest, I'm not sure which way it'll go sometimes.
I was just going to share a bit of information that I thought might leave you all feeling as hopeful as it makes me feel when I think about this. Certainly, when we monitor the distribution of the teaching kits that we send out, obviously sometimes it's very obvious where these people heard about our curriculum. They heard about us through a Fred Korematsu Day event, through one of our outreach events. But other times, when I look at these teaching kit requests, it's not as obvious. And I'll tell you that it's very often that I look at the requests coming in, and recently we had some requests coming in from Arkansas. And I just thought, wow, how great, and we have a little comments field where these teachers are able to share with us how they heard about us, why they're requesting this. And, don't underestimate just the eagerness of a lot of really good people out there. And I find it so great to know that this story is being told and everything that ties into it in places like Arkansas, where you never know. I mean, maybe there are no API students in that classroom. Maybe there are no Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian students in that classroom. But either way, it's great that they're learning about it. And if there is that one API face, that one AMEMSA face, I think about what kind of impact being exposed to this kind of education can have on that person's experience. As Zara was saying, even just that student's willingness to celebrate his or her own identity.
I kind of want to talk a little bit about going forward and how, in your respective worlds, what that means with Vincent Chin, but also with this Pew study. What's implicated? What happens now?
You're referencing the Pew study that just came out that's
Yeah.
all over the papers about
Yeah.
how Asians are so successful, making
And
lots
so
of money.
happy. So happy.
happy, extremely happy, more happy than anybody else. I was just searching, every time I saw an article on this, I was searching for the piece in there where they say, well, Southeast Asians aren't doing as well, and this group's not doing as well, but that's buried in this big conglomeration of pushing all Asians together and playing with the numbers to make us seem as successful as possible. But I think moving forward, the caucus will continue to do what we do, which is focus on helping the most vulnerable in our communities. And in this particular time period, we're really focusing on helping undocumented immigrants and undocumented DreamAct students, which is the other youth group, work that we do, Aspire, which is an undocumented group of Asian dreamers that have formed the last couple of years. And it's surprising. It started with 2 or 3 students, and now it's, I think, 20 to 30 students. And they are, in the beginning, we didn't even know how they should share their stories, how they should go public to come out of the shadows and say, I'm not this model minority. I've been living in terror every single day of my life, still am. Last couple years, I think DreamAct students across the country have taken a leap of faith, and they've just come out on camera, come out in protests, engaged in civil disobedience, and just let things fall where they fall by making themselves even more vulnerable than they already are. So that's, I think, where the caucus is moving forward.
I think with the model minority myth that we all, I think, understand and recognize, there are actually 2 parts of it, but we tend to focus on just one. Right? So the first part of it is we have needs in our community that are not talked about. The needs of poor people and refugees and the Southeast Asian community, Pacific Islanders. And so we tend to, want to lift those up. But we never talk about as much, I think. The second part of it is that the myth, what it does is it marginalizes the struggles of the Latino and the African American community by saying, hey, Asian Americans have the cultural rights stuff, and so that's why, all the other groups, it's really it's an individual culture or character flaw, right? And so as much as we do need to dispel the model minority myth, we have to talk about both parts of it. I think there's also maybe a third part that we need to begin to think about, which is that there are Asian American subgroups that are doing well. Right, and they historically have been here longer. The Chinese American community is a big part of that, and you can't look at the Bay Area and sort of deny some of the successes we've had in terms of representation in elected office anymore. And the mayor spoke about that briefly, and with that comes a responsibility. And I think we have to step up to those responsibilities. There's a big affirmative action case that's being heard by the Supreme Court soon. And you do see a lot of Asian Americans nationally lining up on what I think is the wrong side, right? And the idea that, oh, well, we've made it, and so we can close the door behind us. And I think that's a big, big problem. Now, if we go really forward, and I think the forward is coming faster than we realize, Asians are already the majority globally, right? Asians represent a global majority, right? And 30 years ago, during the Vincent Chin case, the amount of travel that occurred between continents was much different than it is now. The ability for people to digest media from all around the world was very different than you have now. And so, I think that being able to understand that the unique privilege of being Asian Americans isn't just within the context of what our struggles are, and not only with the struggles within other communities of color, but this idea that across the world now, there are folks who are watching. And so the story of Jeremy Lin, on the one hand, here is about someone who was overlooked, who's been successful, breaking stereotypes. But if you see the amount of Weibo, which is sort of like the Chinese Twitter, the amount of followers he has in international context, I think that's something that we need to start understanding our work, not just from a domestic perspective, but what it means from a global perspective. But that is leaning pretty far forward.
I think that if we as APIs are successful or not, oftentimes the mainstream American community sees us as outsiders nonetheless. And what happens when the next national security threat comes from another country? As I think Helen mentioned earlier when she opened the program, she mentioned the great economic rise of countries like China, of countries like India. When I hear about Hollywood films being made, such as this one called Red Dawn, which thankfully has had production delays. Let's hope they continue to delay that film from coming out. But I feel very worried, and I think we don't have the luxury of not being inclusive. We don't have the luxury of dividing ourselves further than we are already divided. Fred Korematsu was a 23-year-old young guy. What were all of us doing at age 23? He didn't have the luxury of saying, basically what happened to him, it landed on him, and he had to make a decision. He ultimately chose to defy a government order, but he wasn't going around planning to become a civil rights hero. So, like I said, I think we just don't have a choice. We have to stay as united as possible.
I think we have to unite beyond the choir. I mean, look around. I would hope there are no racists in this room. I was having this conversation with a colleague of mine yesterday, and we were talking about, the potential audience, and we were so excited, of course, that there would be so many people here and in cities across the country. But this is where it starts, cannot be where it ends. As I was thinking about, what I wanted people to leave these events with, I'm hoping that everyone leaves with a commitment to challenge hate in their own lives, right? Something that was a real wake-up call for me in 2010, or a reminder, was a story of 3 young Muslim Afghan men from the East Bay who had driven into the city several times and done drive-by shootings with a BB gun, which is still a gun, targeting gay clubs. And so they would drive by these gay clubs looking for gay men outside to shoot at them. And they weren't just hateful, they were reckless. They were videotaping themselves. And so they hit someone in the face, and the cops were called, and they were hauled off to jail. And we actually participated in sort of like a restorative justice process with them, or an attempted process with them. And they went through a program in Santa Clara County where, their sentences were minimal in exchange for sincere apologies, right? Like, can you meet with the families? Can you go out into the LGBT community and learn about this community that you were targeting? And so to me, there's so much hate out there, and it exists within our own communities, within our own circles, and we need to start challenging it. And so for me, moving forward, we're going to continue to provide direct services to people who need them, but we want to make sure that we're having this conversation over and over and over again. And on on the Pew poll and on the way the mainstream media tells our story. Stop letting them tell our story. We need to tell our own story. So many of you are on Twitter and Facebook. Don't wait till you go home. Do it now, right? Start now. Take control of that narrative. I don't want somebody who is not me, somebody who is not Muslim, somebody who has not lived my experience to tell my story. And so I'm not going to let them. I don't have the luxury of not being engaged.
All right. I really want to get you guys ask questions, but before we do that, can we get a round of applause for everybody?